is we're going to say we've done a discharge measurement using another method. It's not one of these, and in this case, it's basically a manual entry one. So we put that. What we should have noticed again is we now get a couple more options appearing on here. So every time we do some form of discharge measurement, we will get more rows essentially, or more items sitting under this hydrological activities. When we first start using the system, we need to get our units correct. So for flow and level, and make sure that, because there's lots of options, that we've got them right. So to set them, there is this gearing button over here. And if we click on that and choose select units, we get to say what units we want to work with. And they're the ones that will appear on the screen. So we want, in our case, we want cubic meters. So we find that in the list as cubic meters per second, more specifically, for discharge. And for our distance to gauge, which is a height one, we want to do that in meters. So we set those and just hit the change. And that just affects the units that are in the screen in terms of when it asks you to put inputs, what units it expects the answers to be in. So discharge will be in cubic meters. The next step is we're going to put in the value that we got for the discharge. So this is assuming we've been out in the field and we worked out what the discharge was. And in our example, we worked out the discharge on this day was 17.56 cubic meters per second. So we find the discharge record and we enter that in. At that stage, we say, well, we're happy to make sure we've saved this. So we're going to hit the save button. Then what they ask us to do, and this is something that is a tracking issue, and we'll see this more why this is useful tomorrow when we start looking at the preparation of ratings. But certainly through these examples, what they are keen that we do is that under the visit, for any gauging that we've done, if we click the discharge option over here, we get the discharge summary screen. And in the discharge summary screen, there is a measurement ID. So that is intended that if for every gauging in the system that we do across all our sites, we give them a unique identifier. And in this case, they've said, well, for this example, we're going to say the identifier on this visit, we're going to give it the ID 523. And as I say, tomorrow we'll see more of the reasons why it's useful to have all of your gaugings identified with an identifier like this. You get to choose how you want to assign those numbers, but it's valuable to give each gauging a unique ID. They've also said on this page, we check the gearing again because some of the information that we get to put in the summary page is velocity information. And so we need to make sure that the velocity is set up in the units we want. So again, if we do select units, we just want to make sure that our velocity units are meters per second. So now we've said discharge in cubic meters, velocity in meters per second, and heights in meters. Change. So having done that, we don't need to do it again. So that again is kind of when you first set up and use the system, you need to do that. But after that, you shouldn't need to do it very often. When we do a gauging, the minimum really set of information for a gauging is the discharge that we've already entered and what the corresponding height of the river or channel was at the time. So under this field visit, if we're on the discharge summary screen, there is a section where we get to put in the height that the height of the river or the gauge height at the time we did the gauging. So in this case, for this example, we're going to say we manually calculated what the height was. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to set our height, which we've been told for this example was 2.18 meters. One of the things that people will use as they're working with gaugings is when you start preparing ratings is you try and fit the rating curve through your gauging so that all of the points for your rating line fit through the gaugings. To help with that, the system can put an uncertainty on each gauging, which means when you're looking at it in the rating tool, which we'll see tomorrow, it can put box and whiskers types uncertainty bounds on the gaugings to help you work out roughly if your rating is going through the gaugings within the uncertainties of it. So the way you can do that for a gauging is you can mark, if you want to, the uncertainty approach for it. And so what we've done for this example is and I'm just looking at, so people who are following along in the document, we're at step 2, adding an uncertainty value. So on page 42, step 2. So we apply the quality assurance. So we're going to put our name in to keep again record of. And then in this case, we've chosen type B. And then we're saying how it is. Now, as you'll see in the notes, there's quite a lot of, there's a reference to some help on what are these different uncertainty methods and when might you choose to use them and what do they mean. We're not really going to go through that now, but what we will do is use this as an example to find them in the help. So help in this tool is just about always available on a screen in your top right. There is always a help button. So what we'll do is, if you see up here, there's a question mark. So if we click on that, it opens a window with the help in it. And the particular help they were pointing us to in this section was, I'm just trying to have a look, about the uncertainty approach. So this is the reference in the manual that talks through a little bit about the different options for uncertainty approaches. And you can see there's the explanation of the different approaches. So one of the first steps when you're using the tool is if you're not quite sure of things is always come and look at this help. If this help doesn't explain what you're doing or you've run in an issue, then as we alluded to yesterday, some of you will have access to the online support portal that Aquatics run, and that often might have further information. So if you can't get the answer from the help, you tend to go and search the online system, see if there is help. And if that really hasn't answered it, you will then generally open they have a issue tracking system where you can ask questions, report bugs and things like that. And so you would raise an issue with them, and then someone will actually look at that and respond to it. So having put that information in, we would hit save. In the case of NIWA, it's probably fair to say that we really enter gauging type information or calibration information now manually like this. In most cases, nowadays we're using instruments called ADCPs and various technological instruments like that to help us do these gaugings, which output files about the gauging. And so it's most of the time what we're doing is we are loading those files that were created when we were in the field into the system. So a lot of the next few examples are just demonstrating loading field visits fairly quickly using the various sort of common outputs from some of these pieces of equipment. So before we just move on to, I guess we're almost up to step 3, is if we look at this, what we would now see, if we go back to our springboard and look at the river, you can see that looked empty, but if I refresh the screen now, we will see we have a field visit listed. If I just close that screen and close that, there's the field visit listed. And in summary, what that's telling me, Q means discharge. So in a summary form, that's saying the field visit was this date. We haven't really talked about approvals yet, but its approval is working by default. And that we obviously did a gauging with identifier 523 on that day. If we want to go back and look at those details that we just entered, then where the date field is, if you click on the date, it's a link, and that takes you back to the view we were in. And if you need to review things or edit things, that's how you would get to them. So generally, for a field visit, if you want to edit one, you find the visit you're interested in under the visits tab, and then click on this date link, and that will hyperlink you through to the next level of detail about the visit. So that's the general pattern for how you find a field visit once you've been using them and they've been collecting. And the fact that this identifier is also quite useful if you want to track one down, you can help search on that and find it. So now we're up to step 3. We're going to look at loading a field visit information for what is known as an AquaCalc profile. So this is a particular device that does gaugings, and we're going to show you how to just import one of those quite quickly. So what we do is we're now looking to import things quickly. So we draw our attention to when we're on the visits tab. So when we're in this view, see in this, it's a different view here, but when we're on the visits tab, we have this import data section showing. And what this enables us to do is quickly load gaugings into the system. We have two options. If our gauging is in a file, we can drag and drop and just drop it here, or we can select it manually by clicking on this. So in the first instance, we're going to try and just use the select one. So for those that are following along, we use select files. We will want to go to our training material. And this is where we need to be careful that we're using the right ID. So we're in lesson 4, so we click on lesson 4. You can see under lesson 4, there is a separate directory for the different users that are working through the system. So I'm training 16, so I want to go to the training 16 directory. If you're training 9, you want to go to the training 9 directory. And so I want to go to training 16. We are in the metric, we're doing metric entry, so we go to the metric subdirectory, and these are the files that we're slowly going to work through. The first example we're going to pick is this AquaCalc. Now, the reason that we need to go to the right directory is that if we look at these files, one of the things about these files, if we just opened one, this is the one we're about to, is they will tend, as part of the output and the way they were collected, to have a site name entered as part of the work you did in the field. So if I look, mine, we should be able to find. Oops, why not? Can I not spell? Two eyes. So we can see in here that part of this format is that this is the field that has the site name in it. So the reason we had to go to those separate subdirectories is in my subdirectory, the thing is called training 16. For the training user, training 01, the ID would be training 01. That's why I have to pick the right one, because the import we're about to do knows to look at that field to work out what site to load the gauging against. So if we just try that now, if we go back to our user interface, so again, we've done select files. We go back, find lesson 4, I'm training 16, you will be something else, metric, pick the AquaCalc and load it. We see over here the system is attempting to load it and it's telling us how it's going. The fact that it turns up as green means it's been successful. If it failed, you would get a red with an error message letting you know why it didn't manage to load the gauging. What we will also notice over here now is instead of having one field visit, we've now got two. To have a look at what the information was in that gauging, we use what I showed you before is we click on the date of that gauging, that's a link, and that will open us up and we can have a look at the information that was entered in this. So what we can see quickly is that there was a gauging. When you look here, if there is this sort of set of a discharge and a discharge section main, that means there's been a gauging during this field visit. What the example wants us to do, and I'm on step 3 again of this exercise on page 43, they want us to go to the discharge summary screen, which is this one. So the discharge one. And again, they want us to put an ID in. So the file we loaded didn't have the unique ID in for the gauging. So what we're going to do is we're going to manually add it. And they have asked us to make this one 525. So we've been asked to do that. What we also want to look at is to talk about these dispatch options. So we're now looking at this little bit down here in the sections, which is, these are the rules you're putting in, or the instructions for the system, in terms of when I've entered this field visit and this gauging information, where should we show it, i.e. who can use it? And so what we're saying is we do want this gauging to appear in the rating development toolbox, which we will see tomorrow. We do want to be able to see these values in the data review toolbox. And I want to see that this information is published to external systems. So this means this information could go through to web portal if you're using web portal, or if you're using computer programs to read from this database using the API, whether those programs will see these gaugings. So you can control who has access to this gauging after you've entered it. In this case, we want to leave it all as that. So the only thing we really changed is we added a measurement ID. So we just do save because we measured it. If we just quickly flick around, you'll see that the key information, we still, for a visit, as per normal, we had a start time and an end time. We do have a default approval for it. And then we have the discharge information based on what the file loaded. Now, did they want me to look at this? I'm just going to have a look at this. So one of the points of note that's a bit different about this gauging, and it's probably quite common, is that in terms of when you're doing your calibration, you need to say what you're going to say is the level of the river. Now, if the gauging has taken a reasonable amount of time, you may have measured the river at the beginning and you may have measured the river at the end of the gauging, and it's appreciably different. So one option is that the system, and in this example does it, is that you actually took the gauging at the levels of the river at the beginning and the end, and you're saying, let's make the gauging use the simple average of those. So you can see in this case what this is saying is that the start level was 2.15 meters, the end level was 2.188 meters. We've said do a simple average. So the system is going to say that the level for this river, for this gauging, it would report it as 2.169. Remember the first example we did, we said we were just going to manually put in what we said the rating value, the level of the river was. This is just a different example, and all of this in this case has come out of the file from what was entered in the field using the proprietary software that would have come with this piece of equipment. So Aquarius knows how to read those files and pull the pertinent pieces of information out and put them into the Aquarius tool to use. We can also see some more details. If we move to the details side of the gauging, we can see some interesting. So this particular gauging is one where we use transects across the river. So I mean, I guess this diagram down here is probably a kind of nice view of it. We worked our way across the river, and we used the traditional. We did so called transects, and then we did measurements in each vertical, where we use different techniques. So for these verticals, they were doing a measurement. We can see they were using a measurement at 0.2 and 0.8 to get the average velocity. And then having got the average velocity and we know the width of the channel, we can get an area, and so we can work out, if given the velocity, how much flows in each of these, and then it sums them all up for us. So this is quite a nice tool for your traditional sort of current meter gaugings and various tools like that. So this is a view you can see where you can see all the information. This was all loaded out of the file that we imported, because it's all recorded out in the field automatically on this instrument. So we have a full record of that once we come back into the office that we can review and use. One thing to note also about this field visit that we're looking at is that the file we load is put in as an attachment. So we keep a record of the file that we loaded to generate this information. So that is always kept in the system, so we can see the file, and if we need to check it, it is present and it's recorded in the system, so it's not lost. The file that was loaded is in the system. Just looking at page 45. And again, there's a reference to the help there in terms of if you're interested in these sort of different discharge section methods and things, then there is a reference. Let's go and find it. Practice again using the help. So we use the help. We could search, so we can type in a search. But I'm just going to have a look at where we're at. So it says springboard with tabbed. See if I can find it. Maybe I will do the search on this one. So if we search for discharge sections. So this is the section that they were referring to. So again, help on these things, sitting with visit records, frequently asked questions. We can drag this out a bit if we want more space to see it. I've just got this zoomed up a bit to try and help you see what I'm doing. So again, help to look at various options in the system. Okay. And we can check this on this gauging, everything is saved. So I'm okay. I can close this gauging and we're done with it. It's in the list. And if we refresh, we should see that we have an identifier on that one now, which is what we want. So the next example we're going to work through, which is step 4 on page 46, is we're going to try loading one from a Sontec flow tracker file. So in essence, it's a very similar process. It's just a different manufacturer's file that we're looking at. So let's drag and drop this one. So if I open up my list of files, what I should be able to do is this one we're going to do is the flow tracker one. So it's this file here. If we grab it and drag it, again, it's going to load it for us. It's green, so we know it's loaded okay. And it's loaded the extra gauging into the system. In this case, the gauging on the 16th of October in 2013. Like the other ones, we're going to give it an ID. So we open it up to edit it. We could put in, they did suggest you could put your party in if it's not there. In this case, there's already a party in there. We'll pretend that's okay. What we're going to do is change the identifier, which is in the discharge summary. We want this measurement ID. So we put 532. What we also will find in this one is that the mean gauge height. So this particular file has given us the flow value, but not actually given us the stage height. So we need to put in a stage height. So in this case, we're going to go back to saying, well, we're manually calculating it, manually entering it. So we're going to put that in, and we've been told to make that 1.83 meters. Don't worry about these. You see these various red lines coming in. Part of this is because we haven't really developed our rating and things like this yet. We get various errors, but for what we're doing at the moment, they don't matter. Having put the ID in, our standard behavior is we save. And if we go back and update, we'll see that we have the identifier. So when we look here, we can see a couple of these are popping up now, and they're indicating that we have a discharge. But we've also got something else measured. You can see something else is shown there. Now, if we look at that, what that's telling us is that there's been a reading at the loop. So as well as doing gaugings, which we get recorded down here in the activities, we can put readings, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But in this case, the one we loaded, we can see that part of the information, there was a water temperature record. It said the water temperature was 15.4 degrees when we did that. So other pieces of information that we collect as part of the gauging can be entered, and typically are entered as readings as part of the record of all the information about while we were in the field. I think what we're seeing here is someone has potentially, I think, added the gauging under my gauging as well. That's why this looks to me like this the same gauging. So that's why I think we've got one too many in there, but that doesn't matter. So we're now up to step 5. So we're going to try a different manufacturer again. So we're on step 5 on page 46. So now what we're looking at is a Wind River 2 HydroML file. So this is again is a different type of ADCP. These acoustic instruments that we use to traverse across the rivers. This is how a lot of them are done now, a lot of the gaugings. So we load that one. So this is this XML file. Again, drag and drop it in. We should see success, and now we've got yet another gauging in there, this one being on the 12th of the 12th of 2013. So again, let's have a look at it. Start and end dates. We need to put the ID in, so familiar path now as we go and look at the discharge summary result and put in a measurement ID of 533. And save. If we look at the details that came in with this one, we can see that under the sort of this particular channel, there was 81 QMEX. We can see the dates. We can see all sorts of information about the device that's coming from this file, serial numbers, the software versions, all these sorts of things. So the details that appear under this tab, so the summary is pretty constant no matter which gauging file you've loaded, but some of the details that appear are dependent on the file that's been loaded and what's been populated. So there's, in this case, we can see that was the percentage of the river that was actually measured, which would appear to me not to be a great percentage of the actual river. We can see how many transects we did, which is that in doing this measurement, the ADCP went across the river 4 times to give the final result. And we can see the width and the area. So we start to get some sort of cross-section type information. You can see the total width that we measured, the area that was measured under it, and various things. So there's all this sort of information sitting there in detail if you want to review it. And all of that came out of the files that we loaded. Sometimes if you're not using ADCPs or in fact, probably more commonly, when you're first starting up, you might have a lot of historic gaugings that you need to get loaded into Aquarius. So this next method is quite useful for that case particularly, but can be used generally if you want to. So we're up to step 6 on page 47. So this is a method where multiple field measurements can be entered from a single CSV. And if we look at that CSV that we're going to load here, the format of it looks like this. We can open it in Excel. Well, let's open it in Notepad, but you can open it in Excel, or maybe I will open it in Excel. So we can see it's a pretty standard. In this one, we've got the locations, we've got some identifiers, we've got the start and end dates, stage at start, stage at end. So if you prepared your own files that looked in this format, you could quickly load a whole lot of historic gaugings into the system. But it's pretty summary sort of information. It's not all the detailed type transects and all that sort of thing that we potentially saw for the others. It's the summary, stage, discharge, area, velocity. So some of the core parameters that people often want from a gauging, but not full amounts of detail. So let's look at how quickly we can load that. So let's not say. So what we do is we grab the arid rating. Oops, let's just close this one because we've finished with this. So we're going to drag and drop it onto this view as we have before. Just grab the CSV and load it on. And it's loaded them all, and now we can see we have quite a lot of gaugings in the system. How this works for those that are interested is there is a part to the system called tabular CSV importing process, and so you can write your own rules if you are advanced. The simplest thing to do would be to copy this format and load that, because that's inbuilt now. You could just drag that in and it would work. If you actually want to do slightly different set of information and load it into the gaugings, you can define that yourself. And that's called, these are your own field tabular CSV loaders. And there's a whole syntax and set of instructions for how you would build them into the system so that you can actually basically do your own custom sort of standard import of field visit information. So once you look at it, it is reasonably straightforward to produce your own format where you can drag and drop your own format files into the system and load them up as field visits. So that's something to keep in mind. There are some standard ones built in, but if you want to do a variant where, because you collect a particular piece of information and you want that to be recorded and it's not in this, not in the standard imports that you've got here, you can put it in. Long as you do need it to load into one of the standard sort of fields in the field visit information. So you need to be able to say this column in the file is going to end up, say, as the start date for the visit. This one's going to be the end date, various things like that. So there does need to be a place to put it, but there is a syntax that you can basically set up to say, take this row and put it this position in the field visit, and you can define your own. So that is something that you just probably want to keep in mind as you start using Aquarius. You might make use of that either to load in historic ones or potentially even ongoing ones. It might be the method for doing it. Moving on to step 7, which is on page 47. We're now looking at, as well as the gauging information, we might want to add files or images or pictures or various pieces of information that you captured while you're in the field to also back up the information. Sorry, I was just looking at what's going on in the chat. So what we're going to do in step 7 is we're going to add an attachment. So they've said grab the visit from 7th to the 8th and open it. So again, looking at our visits for our location, find the one on the 7th of August 2013 and open it. So we click there, it opens up in the new window. And they say go to the upload section. So again, we have 2 options. Per the other one, we can drag and drop, or we can manually find the file using the select. First thing we want to do is, as we did touch on this yesterday, when we load a file, we need to say whether the file is something that should be explored to see if there's actual field visit information, as in it's going to try and look for data inside the file to try and pull out like we've just been doing, or just load the file, please. So in this case, we're saying because it's a picture, we're saying don't look for field visit information. There's nothing in here. Just load this file against this field visit, please. So we put the attach incoming files, do not check for field visit. And then we're going to go select. And as long as we're still in our lesson 4 section, there is this control channel picture. So we go open and it'll attach it. We can put a meta in it. And so in this case, we're going to choose, we're going to say it's a channel view. And then we load it. We can then review that by moving to the images and video for the visit. And we can see it's in this case, it's not a photo, it's more of a picture explaining how this river works. But you could put photos and various things like that. Something else, so we're now moving on to section 8, step 8, sorry. And this is talking about control conditions. So this is something that the USGS over in the United States are very big on this. And so it's been added into the tool. In New Zealand, I guess we are starting to more and more add this sort of information, but it hasn't been quite as standard for us. So this is basically whenever they go do a gauging, they put in some descriptive information in about the control that was in the site. And any of you that do gauging, I hope when we start talking about controls and things like that, that will mean something to you. For many of you who don't actually go out and gauge, this probably won't be terribly meaningful, but we'll go through this example anyway for those that understand it. So to add some description of the control conditions, we have the visit summary, and we have this ability under the new activity to add control conditions. And we've been told to, for our example, we're going to say control conditions. Sorry, we're going to say the party, where maybe I should say it's me, it's doing it. So let's put my badge in. The control conditions for that was channel control. That was the condition. How was the... So this one is describing which kind of control is happening at the time you're visiting, whether you're under section control or channel control, which is as a river condition, potentially as rivers get high and low, there's different parts of there's different controls that are controlling what's happening in terms of the relationship between stage and flow. And so this is describing which one of those is in play during the visit. And then this one is a physical description of it in terms of that control. What was it? And so they're saying this, in these conditions, it was clear. And then we've got a distance to the gauge. So we put in 3 meters. Did anybody clean the control? Yes, we did we cleaned it. When did you clean it? 7th the 8th, 11:40. Okay, save. So if you want to enter those for a field visit, we can do. Moving on to step 9. So we're moving around. We're at step 9 on page 49. Sometimes it can be advantageous to load the field measurements and some attachments in one go through a zip file, and that is possible as well. So if we try that as an example, what we're going to do is, again, in our standard visit view, we are going to grab the zip file. And maybe we'll just have a quick look at what the zip file has. Inside the zip file, there is a CSV, which is actually a one gauging set of information, and 2 files that should be attached. So a picture and a spreadsheet. And if we now grab that zip file and drag it in, it has loaded it. It's told us it's created the visit on the 29th of the 1st. So if we want to look at the details, we can click on that, or here. So we click on it. What we can see is there is the gauging, which was the 537, which was the CSV, and it has automatically loaded some attachments. So there's the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet's in there. That's the file. That was the gauging file. And then if you look at the image, here's the image that we loaded in. And this is an example. Someone's found some historic records from notes, so they've loaded that in so they're not lost. And that's the sort of thing you can do. Moving on, was anybody got any questions on those sort of activities? So that's the main techniques that we would use to load, I guess, gauging oriented information into the system. So either manually or using sort of a lot of the big player ADCP files can be automatically loaded into the system. So it can be quite quick to get your gauging information from the field and get it loaded into a queries. If there's no question, we are going to move on to step 10, which is a survey level activity. So this example is coming back to our datums and our benchmarks, and so what this is doing is it's basically a check. This example is a check of the benchmarks that we had, which are those things we talked about yesterday, where we had a couple of points that are in the ground at the site that we have measured in and know exactly where they are, and we're monitoring how those are moving so that we know the overall height of the site, if it's moving or not. So this is step 10 on page 50. So what we do is, again, if we start from the beginning, they're saying let's add the survey level survey information to the visit on the 7th of the 8th of 2013. So find that visit and we open it. Make sure we're on the visit summary tab. And then what we can do is we can do a new activity, which is a level survey. So we pick level survey from the options. That again then adds this activity under the field visit, and then we need to look to put some information in. So we get to say what method was used to do this leveling, and we've said from this one we were using a GPS technique. So we put that in, and then we're going to put The two, remember when we first set up the site, we said we had two benchmarks. We created these two. So what we're going to do is we're going to give the measurements for those two benchmarks and at what time we took those measurements. The date is assumed because we already had the field visit. The assumption is that we know the date because it was the date of the field visit that already existed. That's a bit of a worry. Given my laptop's plugged in, you might just need to excuse me for a minute. I need to sort out why I've got no power happening. Do you want to just take a couple of minutes while I just check that because my laptop's about to turn off? That looks better. Can you hear me again? My laptop is now receiving power. I shouldn't disappear on you, right? I just need to rearrange my screens again. So sorry about that. Where we were at is we were doing this leveling information and we were about to enter the values for our two benchmarks that we say exist at this site. So on the 7th of August in 2013, we went out and we checked the benchmark points, and at 11:40, because we're metric, they've said we should put the first one at 10.21 meters. Whoops. And the second measurement said that we confirmed it was at 11:45. The second benchmark was at 8.9 meters. And then we save that. And so we've got information of how we've checked our benchmarks and whether they're moving. In the help, there is a link, sorry, not in the help, in the manual that we're working through, there is a link to some USGS resources that you could have a look at with more information about leveling, engaging. So if these examples didn't quite make sense to you in terms of what they mean in the real world, then go and have a look at this sort of information. The USGS have a lot of resources available that are helpful for these sorts of things. And the USGS is an Aquarius user now, so most of their information is directly applicable, especially if it's recent. So we're up to number 11. So field visits. So this is, we talked about that a little bit before, where we went to the field and we measured something specifically while we were out there. So it was a spot measurement. So a lot of what we're doing in the field generally is, we have a continuous record, say, of water temperature or a continuous record of stage. And when we go into the visit, we do special readings to confirm that what our continuous record, what we've been logging, actually agrees with what we measured when we did a test out in the field. So the way to record those discrete pieces of information we did is we add them as field visit readings. And so that's what we're going to do. In this one, we're basically going to go in. The very common one that we would do at our hydrometric stations is whenever we go visit the site, we read the staff gauge reading or some primary reference reading to check that that secondary value of stage that we're reading matches what the loggers are saying. So in this example, so we're at step 11 on page 51. We're going to add a reading. So again, as per the other ones, we're going to add this reading to the visit from the 7th of October or 7th of August. So we open it, get into the field visit view. Yes.
Excuse me, your screen is not sharing or moving.
It's not sharing?
Yeah.
Okay, it says it is, but I'll stop it and do it again. Let me know, does that visit, is that sharing now? Is that sharing now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So sorry, I'll just come back and do that again. So we're up to adding a field reading step 11. So we're going to add it to the site. What we did is we found the visit that we want to add it to. So this is this one on the 7th of August. So we open it up again and we're going to do a reading. So the readings sit, not surprisingly, under the reading section of the visit. And if we open them up at the moment, this visit has no readings. If you want to add one, you click the button down here in the bottom to add a reading. And the example that we're reading is we're saying it's a stage reading, so the height of the river. The method, and again, this list is something you get to set for your organization as part of your setup of the system. In this case, we're just going to leave it as none. The value that they've told us is 4.3 meters. We can put an uncertainty figure with it. So in this case, they've suggested we're saying it's plus or minus 0.1 of a meter. The reading type. So this is can be quite important because in the case of our sites at NIA, we have often at a site we have several different ways of checking what the stage river is. So by using this reading type, we can tell which one it is, whether it's the primary reference or a different reference that we've been using. So you can use these to help work out which particular method was used to read it. In this case, they've told us to use reference. I think we're in the reading type. Yes, we got the date. We get to set the date and time. It has defaulted, I think, to the start date of the visit time. And we've said, well, in actual fact, it was done with this. So we've given even more hints as to how it was measured by saying this is the sensor that we were reading and it was used to give it, which is, if we look at this, this is the sensor that we added yesterday. We added a sensor into the system, this primary stage. That's us saying, well, now we're using it and saying this reading we took it against using this sensor. So there we are, tying the readings to the instruments that we used for it. If we keep scrolling along, where am I? We're saying that it was measured against the local assumed datum. And generally think that was a pretty good estimate, so we're giving it a good grade. You can add qualifiers to it. So that's a further, qualifiers are a further way of categorizing the data. And again, you get to set the options that you want. We will come into qualifiers a little bit more when we look at correcting the data, but they're sort of useful pieces that are categorical. So instead of being a free format text note, qualifiers tend to be, you're adding extra notes from a pick list of options that have been managed and controlled. So they're the sort of thing that you might want to report on or use for filtering. In this case, we're not going to add one, but you can, and then we go save. So for most field visits that we do at NIWA for a flow site, we would expect generally there will be a gauging and there will be some readings that have been entered. The gauging will generally be loaded through a file like we did as an example. You just drag and drop it in, give it its identifier, and that's about all you probably need to do. And then you'll manually add these readings that you made when you were in the field. We are in the process, I guess, of rolling out, starting to use an electronic forms app to collect that information in the field and have it automatically integrated into Aquarius. But right now, people are manually putting these in when they come back from the field. I think this is the last example for the field visit information. So another piece of information that is useful to keep over time at many of our hydrometric sites is the cross-section information. And so if you've manually been out and done a cross-section, it is possible to load that information into Aquarius to keep a record of it. As the manual is saying here in step 12, there are a couple of ways that you can do it. And this example that we're going to go through, they're just subtly different formats. You can put these in manually, but generally it's easy to get these cross sections in. If you create a CSV in the right format, you can just load that CSV into the system, and that's probably the easiest way if you want to get your cross section information in for how to do it. So if we have a look, if we are doing this example, if we go to our files and we look at the cross section and then we just have a look at what that file looks like before we load it. It's a pretty simple format. Basically, there's some metadata and then there's a number of points that basically describe the cross section. So if you can create your cross sections in this format, then you can just drag and drop them and load them into the system. So that's what we're going to do. So we grab the cross sections. Well, let's go back to here and close our field visit again. And go to visits. Got a drag and drop option. And we drag the cross section in. You can see it's loaded for this visit. And if we now look under there, we can see under our hydrological activities, we can see we did a cross section for this visit. If we look here and we look at the summary information, you can see that this one's been added with a cross section. So you can see, so this summary view is quite useful for seeing what was done very briefly in each of the visits. So we can see this one included a cross section. So if we want to find the cross sections, we could filter off here to get the list and then go and look at the details of them. If we look at the cross section information, it includes a diagram sort of showing you the points. And in the example, we've said we can further edit this if we want to. So what we could do is here's the points in a tabular format. We can add a point. We need to say which point in the point order is this. So we're going to put it at the end. So they've said make it 0.31 and the distance is 27.43 and the elevation is 1.98. And if we just have a look, the view looks like this at the moment, and particularly look at this corner. And then when we add the point in, by ticking it, you can see that we've now added an extra point to the cross section. and we can see it up there. So you can add them manually or through CSV or a combination of the two. So they're very useful to keep over time and giving you a view of how your cross sections at your rivers are potentially changing over time. So the tool can record those for you. Oops. And here's an example again of me attempting to leave the page without having saved it first. So I need to go up and save it to keep the information. So we've covered most of the common ways to get field visit information in. There are others. And so if we just quickly look, there are these other activity types that you can use. So we have really done a discharge section. And again, these are described in the help manual if you want to go and look for that. Volumetric is the approach where you've got a method where you've been filling up something and you see the rate at which a certain volume filled up. So if you're measuring sort of flow and estimating flow and using that kind of method, then you would use that kind of activity type to record it. Engineering structures. So those are, sorry, I'm just having a look. Those are, if you've got flumes and weirs potentially in place, so they're formulaic type expectations around how the thing should respond and how values are calculated, then there's a particular type for that. And then ADCP, which we looked at, we looked at. Gauge height at zero flow, we'll talk about when we get to ratings. We looked at doing an example of channel control conditions, cross-section and survey. So again, if you want to see further information on those other techniques, which is mainly the volumetric and the engineering one that we didn't do, then just look into the help. There's a bit of information about when those techniques are appropriate. We're now up to step 14, which is looking at basically some of the field information that we've loaded so far. So what we'll have noticed is when we look at this view, we now have quite a lot of records of field visits. We know quite a lot of them did a gauging, which would mean we know we had a stage value recorded and a flow value recorded. But looking through each of those to see the set of them is, you can only see one of them at a time that way. Sometimes you want to see all of those readings at once, essentially as a time series. And the way you do that is through this field visit readings section. So this tab is built based on information that's been put in these field visits. And essentially it's worked out what various bits of information exist in here. And we load them. So you can see I've obviously ended up putting some discharge in feet per second instead of cubic meters. And a temperature in Fahrenheit, not in. But what we can see is this is the list. And if we want to look at them as a time series, so say we want to see all of the values, you can click on that and plot it with your time series chart and it'll show you them. So you can see exactly what field visit are and what their values are. And you can see the readings. So that's a way of taking what is separately recorded under field visits individually and putting them together as a time series. So that can be useful if you want to see all the stage readings, if you want to see all the flow values as a time series, you come and do that. One of the things you can also do as part of that is if we look at the height of gauge ones, we can see that the values are the values that we entered, which are in the local assumed datum. One of the options in here is you can show the values in the actual datum set, this NAVD88. So if we do that, you'll see that suddenly they're then shown in the values relative to that datum, which we know is 270 meters above the local datum that we set up. So you can switch between these views using the UI. You can also do things like, in some cases you'd say, I don't really want to see it's not meaningful to see the line between these because they're so far apart. It's not meaningful to link them in any way. So if I want to, I can turn off those. So there's various ways you can use these tools to explore the data. And if we look at it, this view here gives us the view of our time series, of our visit type information as time series. Back here, we've got the stage ones. The continuous records that we set up yesterday. And if we look at that now, in the earlier section, I talked about the dispatch rules that said, which other elements of the system can see this information. What we can see here is we said that basically the data review tool could see the information. So we can see that for our stage record, this is the data that we loaded. We can now also see marked on it what field visits we made and what the values for those field visits were. So this is part of the dispatch options that makes this appear. And we'll see them again when we do ratings tomorrow. So now what we tend to have is we'll have a plot that when we're looking at stage, we can also see the field information, which will also help us work out potentially if we've got corrections to make, which we're about to start soon. We can use that information to help us make the corrections. The other thing to note about this, when we're in the field visits, if you want to export one of these time series, you can click on it and then over here to hit the export button. Where's that gone? You can see what it'll do is it'll export those down to your desktop and you can look at those. So you can get them out very easily with various pieces of metadata about them. So there's the stage values as a time series, uncertainties, various metadata that goes with them. So all of these things can be exported as well. So that's simple as you just click the ones you want. If you wanted 2 of them, you could export it. Will it let me? It looks like maybe you have to do them one at a time. That, by the way, that also applies for your time series here. If you click one of those, you can also use the export. I think we come to that in some later examples. So the last example in this section, and maybe we'll take a break after this, is just to have a quick look at the field visits in this. So what are we doing? Datasets tab, select the rating curve, open the rating. So we're just going to have a quick look. So this is the first time we're going to use the rating development toolkit. So we're coming back now to our data sets, and yesterday we created this rating but didn't rating placeholder that we didn't define. So if we click on that and have a look at it with our rating tool, and again this version is an installed one, so you need to have the tools installed. So this is a very quick view of the beginning of our rating tool editor. So this tomorrow, we will come into this and spend some time doing an example of a rating. But the point for now is to note that, again, these dispatch options, the field visit information that we have been loading are these dots in the system. So the system knows that we're doing a stage discharge rating, and so it has brought through the gauging values through to the system to assist us with producing the rating curve. And as you can see, we've got discharge along the horizontal and stage along the vertical, and you can see there's a bit of a pattern. And tomorrow we're going to draw a curve that helps explain that pattern so that we can generically take any stage point and create a flow value for it for a period of time. But for now, the point really was to show that these field visit pieces of information that we've entered are available in this tool, and we will use them tomorrow. And we'll look at the whole, how we can dock and undock things tomorrow. That is a quick exploration of how we load field visit. The next section that we're up to is going to be about, okay, so we've now loaded some data and we've got the field visit information. Let's start looking at our data and seeing if our data makes sense against what we saw in the field visits and what we might do to correct it when we don't think it's correct. My suggestion is this is probably a good time for a quick break if people would like one. How long a quick break would you want? We've probably got 2 more hours after this. So how long a break would be acceptable? Do you want to have a quick stretch of your legs, get a drink? 5 minutes? Shall we take a 5-minute break? Shall we come back at, it's just coming up to 3 o'clock for me. So what's that? Is it just coming up to 10 o'clock for you? Shall we come back at 10 o'clock? So we'll restart at 10 o'clock. Does that work for everybody?
Okay.
All right. We'll see you back at 10 o'clock and we will start lesson 5. See you shortly. Okay, do someone just want to let me know when you think you might be ready to restart?
Shall we continue, participants?
Okay po.
Okay, Engineer Brad, I think we're ready now. I think we can now continue.
Okay, thank you. So for the rest of the day, we're going to be working through lesson 5, which is, I guess, some of it's more fun, which is starting to look at how we fix up and edit the data when we've got it loaded into a query. So we're going to go through how many are there? About 10 or 11 different ways that you could choose to fix up data, how to spot it, and then how to potentially fix it up. And also how, I guess, as you're doing that, how we would mark it up, which is really talking about adding grades to the data as we go. So in our life cycle, we've created the location, we've created the data sets, we've appended data, we've now got the field visit information to help us out. Now we're having a look at the data that we've loaded to see if we need to correct it. So first, I guess, step one really is a quick look at some concepts, just a really one concept mainly, which is any point in time in the data, there is a grade associated with it. Now, what you may not have noticed is if we look at our time series, if we pick one and look at it in the review tool, there are these what are called carpets sitting underneath the data that you're looking at that give you some information. And the particular one is that there is a grade. So in this system, as it is currently configured, all the data by default is being given a grade of -1 unspecified. And by default, the system, they're getting approvals, which we'll look at later, of working. And we can see in this view, because there's nothing under the qualifiers notes and location notes, there's nothing recorded in this period of time as a qualifier note location. The concept that we're just talking about here is, sorry, not that one. Here is grades versus qualifiers. So grades are, as they say, a subjective sort of record of the quality of the data. It's a list of items that you choose from to sort of indicate the quality. There is an assumption in the system that lower numbers are worse than higher numbers. And that understanding that is important because of the way things propagate through the system when we calculate things. In many cases, if we derive a new data set which is dependent on 2 inputs to create the new one, then in many cases the lowest grade from the 2 inputs is the one that will propagate. That's not always true, but in the main, there are propagation rules that go through. Grades are picked from a drop-down list, and you get to define them. So in the system config tool that we talked about yesterday, you get to set them up. In the examples in this system, this is the qualifiers, and I think I showed you, or at least told you, that the list of grades. This is the list of grades by default in the system that comes when you do a default install. And it's quite a long list. NIWA's list is based on the New Zealand standard and is quite a lot smaller than that. It's your choice how many different grades you want to have in your system. But when you grade something, these are the lists that you'll need to do. And as they said, the indication is higher values are generally, in a subjective sense, are better than the lower values. So your worst ones tend to be the lowest. So that's grades. The difference between grades and qualifiers is that qualifiers are, it's almost a note. It's a pick list with a text of common things that you want to put in. So I mean, their example is affected by backwater. So if you've got a period of the record that, you know, is affected because above a certain level, backwater effects come into it, you can put that into the system and it'll show there. And then when you're looking at it, you would see down here, you would see a colored bit under the qualifiers to say, oh, this bit was affected by backwaters, and you can see it. So it's qualifiers are text-based and a bit more descriptive and are a pick list that you get to manage. If you're comparing, so that's what qualifies. So they can be an indication of qualifier. They can be sort of like a grade because they may indicate that the data may not be quite as good because of this thing that's qualifying that's affected by backwater. But it's there. The other thing that you see on the carpet when you're looking at the time series is you see a note and a location note, and those are just fully free format text that you put in. So a qualifier, when you put it in for a period of time, is a fixed list that you get to choose from in terms of what the option is, whereas notes and location notes, if you put them in, are a free text description of the problem. So they're not so useful if you want to do any reporting and categorizing of things, but enable you to be more descriptive. So again, if you've put in a note or a location note, so a note, just to be clear the difference, the note is specifically a note against this data set, whereas the location note is a note that you've written for this period of time, but you put it in against the whole location. So that was yesterday, if we remember, yesterday when we were looking at the location details from our hamburger, there were these location notes. So 13th to the 7th, we put this in. So that would appear, a location note would appear down here on it, should. So that's just a concept that we come into in terms of things you need to think about when you use the system. When will you describe things using grades? When might you add qualifiers to describe them? There are a couple of built-in qualifiers that have some special behavior, which we won't go into much here, but there are a couple of ones that even if there is a gap in the data, if you use them, the system can then actually override them, effectively being a gap. And if you're interested in those, just read up about those couple of special built-in qualifiers. So what we'll do is we'll start now with step 2, and this is our first correction. So there's a bit of a pattern that emerges when we want to make a correction, which is generally we start by finding the period where we think the period of time where this correction is required. We then have to mark up the period. So we sort of select the period that we actually want to change, and then we describe the change that we want to do to that period of data, and then we apply it. So that's kind of the pattern. We've got to find it, we've then got to mark it up, and then we've got to describe the correction. So if we start with step 2, which is a delete correction. So in the instructions, the first thing we've got to say is how do we find it? And we're saying in the data, so we're going to be working with the stage.working data set. There is a flat line around August 27, 2013. So we need to go and find that. So if we just close these and start. So let's start. We're in our location view. We're looking at the time series view. We're going to do our working on the stage.working data set, which is this one. And we need to make a correction. So we open this toolbox, which is our data correction toolbox. And that opens us up to a default view of the data. Now, in the instructions, it said the flat line was around the 27th of August, 2013. So at the moment in this view, it's not obvious what where that flat line is. But if we start zooming in, so we can use, if we click on this button, we can start zooming on our chart. So we can just pick a period of time. We know it's somewhere at the end of August. So let's just zoom in around here. And we see August 27th. So let's zoom in again. And you begin to see now it's obvious. Here's the flat line that we need to do something about. In this one, we're going to kind of go, well, got any other information at the moment for maybe filling it in some way. So what we're going to do, even though we've got data values, we know it's a flat line, they're not the right values. So we're just going to delete these data points for now. So we move on to trying to delete them. So we have, the first step is we found the period. Now we need to mark the period up that we actually want to delete. So we know it's this period from there to there that we want to delete. So the way we mark it up is this button here is the selection tool to mark up the period to make a correction on. So we click on that, and then we, as accurately as we can, try and pick the points. Now, it can be difficult, and you can probably see, or maybe you can't see when you're looking at it from your end, but I probably haven't got that perfectly right in terms of the points that I want to change. There is a little utility here, this icon here, which is called the zoom to period of interest sort of icon, that can help you make sure the period you're marking is right. So in this visual one, if you look, I probably haven't quite got it far enough down here, but if I click on this, it moves me into a mode where if I click it once and then click it again, it shows me the start of the period that I've currently got marked, and I can drag it out a bit to move it to the exact point I want. Something to note about where, when I drag, what it snaps to, as in where does it bounce between with points, because if you see, if I drag it along, it's going, if I stop there, it went to that point. If I stop there, it went to that point. And it's doing that because over here, as part of my edit, it's saying, what am I snapping to? I.e., when I release, where's it going to take as the mark? And the two options are normally a data point, like it's doing here, or field visit readings. And we'll come back to that later in some of the other corrections where we will actually start snapping to the field visit readings. But for here, we're snapping to the time series. So we've got that point right. We click on this button again. If we do it again, it shows us the end one. And we're going, yep, that's our last point. That's part of the flat line. So that's good. So I know I've got the period that I want to correctly mark now. Another way to check it is that that period that's been covered is listed over here. So here to here. And so if you actually know what the dates and times are, you could manually just enter them over here and that would mark them up for you. So there are a couple of ways you can mark the section to correct either visually, or you can come in and set the dates on the markup bit. So having found the air time, and now we've marked up the period that we want to change using the markup tool, in our case, we get to say what kind of change do we want to make. So the changes we pick from this edit type, and there's lots of options in here. And this is kind of what we're doing now in these next sections, is going through most of these, or at least a number of them. This particular one we're doing for this example is we're going to delete. So we just pick delete. Delete's pretty straightforward in terms of you really don't need to set anything else other than the start and end date and the fact that you want to delete it. So it's quite a straightforward one. We will talk about this processing. Just about all corrections have a pre, normal, and post correction. And when we talk about open-ended corrections, which is tomorrow, I think, or maybe it's Friday, we will talk about what these mean. Generally, it doesn't matter too much, but we'll talk about that later. So for now, we don't care, so we just leave it as normal. We can put in a comment, and in the notes, there was a comment they suggested we put in, so I'm just copying that to put it in. So generally, it's good to comment corrections that you're doing. The general advice that we give is don't describe what you've changed. You need to be describing in the comment why you made the change. So that's the main thing. Why did I make this change? It's always good to record why you did it. So then once we're happy with all of that, we go apply. And we see it now tells us the correction has been made. We haven't saved it yet, So we can back out of this if we want to. We haven't saved this to the server. So this means if someone else loads this data set on their machine at the moment, they wouldn't see this correction even though I'm seeing it. Because it won't be till I hit the save button that if someone else comes and reads it, that they'll see this. What we can see is it kind of looks like the line's still there because it's in green. But if we look at the chart or the scale here, what we have is the time series is sort of showing us two views of the data. It is showing us the raw data, which is what we originally loaded. And it's showing us the corrected view in blue, which is what we now think. What we can see is because we're seeing both of them, we can see this period of green. Now that's green because that's what the original data was. If we say, don't show me the original data, we see kind of the view we expect. This is the corrected data, and we see there's a big gap now in this period that we deleted. So just be aware by default, and that's called the correction stack is sometimes what we're talking about, which is we start with our raw data, and then we make a series or a stack of corrections onto that raw data to come up with the corrected view, which is effectively our best view of the data. So don't be surprised if sometimes the green is the original and the blue is what we have corrected it to. And you can just click on these icons depending on what you want to see. So if you want to, generally, you might not want to see the raw, you just want to see the corrected view. So you can just click on those to flick between them. So we are happy with that. So we've applied that correction. The general advice, again, if you're grading your data, is if you've made a correction, it's generally a sign that the grade needs to be marked as well. So while you've still got the period of the correction marked, you generally put in another correction, which is the grade correction. And because of this, we've deleted it. We just basically say, well, it was unusable because it's basically a gap. And we would go apply. So now what we have done is we have deleted the data. We've put a comment in about why we deleted it. And we've also graded that. And you can now see that on this carpet, as we call it, we now have this period is unusable. The other stuff default is still -1 unspecified. And this is unusable because we said that's what we've put. So we've started to mark up the data. If we're happy with all of that, which we are in this example, we now go save. Something to note is if we sort of clear the selection and go back to our view, if we look at that, just so we see what I did there. There are these various options on the right-hand side. We're in the data correction toolbox. If we want to see the corrections we've made, we can look at the edit history and it'll show the corrections for the period we're looking at. Ultimately, this is the correction that we just did, the delete region. We could delete that correction if we wanted to. So even though we've saved this and now it's available to others, we could choose to delete it. When we get into the discussion about approvals on Friday, I think it is, there are if we approve this data to a certain level, we can get it to a point where people can't make changes to it. They're not allowed to. But for now, even though you've made the correction and you saved it, you can go and sort of say, hey, I don't like that, or I've found out that wasn't right, or I made a mistake, and you could delete it. So that's the first correction example, and probably one of the most common that people are likely to make, where we find periods of data we don't have a lot of evidence necessarily for what we should replace it with, so we're just going to turn it into a gap. So that is called an explicit gap. Basically, we've deleted the region. You can set up the system. When we were setting up the data sets yesterday, remember we set those gap tolerances to 16 minutes and to 61 minutes. Those will do when data is loaded. If the distance between two data points exceeds what we said the gap tolerance should be, it will automatically mark the thing between those 2 points as a gap. So that's another way of getting gaps into the system. This is one where we've explicitly deleted data to make a gap. Okay, the next correction we're going to make is a single point one. So again, this is quite a common correction that we might make, that we've got a little spike in the data that we are unhappy with and know is not true. And so we are going to get rid of that. Now, I think in this example, we actually edit it. One option would be just to delete this point. If you delete that point, if the distance between these two is not bigger than the gap tolerance that you've provided, deleting this point will simply make the system think that the line goes between here, and it'll basically say that value is constant between the 2 points. If deleting this point exceeded the gap tolerance, then this would become a gap. Okay, so if you deleted it, that would be the behavior. What we're actually going to do here is we're actually just going to edit the value. So we're not going to delete the point. We're actually going to edit the value, and we're going to say, because we know that point and those points were hit, and all the evidence is that the data was pretty constant here, we are really confident that this point is also probably just should be here. So if we have evidence and know that in our real world that's real, then this is the correction we would make. Again, all of these are examples for us now. All of these changes should have some evidence or some experience that tells us it's the correction we're making is the right thing to do. At NIWA, in many cases, if we know the data is bad and we don't have a lot of evidence for what it is, generally we would delete the data, then edit it and change it. But there are certain conditions like this. If you know you're on a recession, say, and it's pretty much a flat line, then maybe if the gap is this, if this bad value is a small amount of time, you might say there's enough evidence to say that really we know what a replacement value is. So in this case, we're going to assume we do know how to do that, and we're going to replace this value. So first step in our pattern for making a data change is we have to find the period of data. This case, they've told us that the correction, this point, needs to be on October the 3rd. So there's a few ways we could spot that. In this case, you can actually see in the summary tab down here, you can see that there is this point here that clearly is wrong, and in actual fact, it's early October. So this is giving us a pretty big hint. This is the one we're talking about. You could see it if we also expanded this tab to show us more data. So what we're doing by expanding that down there is we're making this view reflect this period from the summary. So we're basically saying show us all of it. Again, we see this point. So we could find it that way. Another way is we could say, well, please show me the data for a particular period. So I know I've been told it's October the 3rd, 2013. So I'm going to put in, say, a small range around there. And I'm going to set the date range, and it will just load that for me. Now, why did I get that wrong? So that hasn't shown to me, so I'm going to zoom out a bit. Oh, it's because I've loaded that. So, I only went to the beginning of the 3rd of the 10th. So sorry, let's give it a bigger period, 6th of the 10th. There we are. So now we've got that period loading, and we can see it. And this indication here, that gumboot, is also an indication that we've got some field visit information around that time as well. So you can see if we hover over it, we went and read it, and that gave us confirmation of what the value is at that time. So we're really confident these values are right and that bit's a bit wrong. So we've done the first step, which is find it. Let's zoom in a bit more to close it. So to zoom in a bit, we just grab and zoom in to zoom in a bit closer. Now what we need to do is we need to mark up the point we want to change. So we click on the marked point, And if we just draw a little line around that point like that, whoops, we've selected too many points, so we just grab it that way. And there we are, we have selected the 1 point. Again, you could just put the time in explicitly in here if you know it. If you want to do it through dates and times rather than using the tool, you can. So now that we have found the region, we've marked the point, we now need to describe the correction we want to make, and what we want to make is a single point correction. And that's an option, so we pick from the edit type, single point. Then what we get to do is to say, well, what's the replacement point? Now, interestingly, in the notes, if you're looking at the notes, it says it's 0.15 meters. If I look at this point here and the thing we can see is more like 1.854, and I've now clicked that data point. So when you hover over a data point in this view, you can see their values. And so I can see the correction is more likely to be about 1.854. So I'm going to use that. Now I've mucked up my correction, so I'm going to clear my correction and select it again. I've got my point, setting it up as single point correction. The value I'm going to put in is 1.854. If I apply it, I can see now that it's put these lines in and it looks right. Again, following my normal pattern, if I'm making a correction, I should also put a grade on it. So we find the grade correction. And this one's not too bad because we've got a bit of evidence that it's in that range. So we're going to give it the estimated fair correction. We apply that, and then we can zoom out a bit to see a bit more if we want to. And you can see it now when we've got that data, particularly if we turn off the raw view, you can see that it's nice. And we don't have that auto scaling issue that we had when that data was in there. We now actually see some granularity. One of the things is you probably all know when you're looking at charts and you've got spikes in them, the auto scaling tends to mean you get that funny scale and you can't see the detail in it. So now it's taken out that and we have a nice record that we can see. So again, we haven't saved it to the server. So when we're finished, we need to remember to hit that save button. So that's the second common type of correction that we would make. The next one we're going to make is an offset correction. So this is sort of the example where sometimes it's a change over time. When we look at this example, when you look at it there, this is not a gradual drift over time. We'll do that one later. This is suddenly the whole record seems to have shifted up or down, and you can see it's kind of what they're talking about in this period to this period. Went down and we can see there was a field visit. This is telling us there was a field visit, so this is probably when they corrected it. So what we need to do is we need to grab what appears to be from this time here where it looks like we did the step down to when we got it back up. We need to move this period of data because it's probably the right shape. It's just been offset. We need to move it all up. So that's what we're going to do in this correction. So this is step 4 on page 60 for those who are looking at the manual. So first step in that is we need to find the period that we're talking about. So in this case, we are told it is around the 8th of December 2013. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, can I load all the data? And then I know they say it's about 8th of December 2013, which is about here. So I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to keep selecting in until I get a zoom that I'm reasonably happy with. That's the period that we're looking at. And so this is the bit that we're going to need to try and correct. So we've roughly found the area that we want to correct. So that's step 1. Now we need to mark it up. So we use the mark tool and we, as best we can, we kind of do the beginning and the end. Now, again, this is long enough period of time. We're not exactly sure we've got the right points marked. So I would use this tool here, the zoom to period of interest one, just to check. So I click on it once, I click on it again, that moves it to the beginning, and I can see it's not quite right. I want it to go to that point. So I've done that. I then look at far end. And yes, that's the last point that's too low. So that's good. So I click on again and I go back to my overall view and I'm kind of going, good, I've got the right period marked. Now I need to describe the correction I want to make. Now, one of the things that they suggest we note here is when we look at the field visit, we can see that the record was 2.987 and the raw was 1.152. So that gives us some idea of how much correction we need to make. But they've marked it up for us. So anyway, so what we do is this correction is called an offset correction. So we click offset. We need to put the parameter, which is how much are we going to offset this record for this period of time, up or down. So we're not changing its shape. We're just going to move everything up or down. And the instructions tell us that because of that field visit, we should move at 1.155. And it's showing you visually what it's going to do. And we think that looks quite good. Again, we should be putting in a comment routinely to explain why we did it, what we did. That's more, yeah. So why? Because the orifice, they're saying the orifice moved during an event. So that's why we suddenly got an offset. And so they obviously went back to field and put the orifice back in the right position in the water. They fixed it back in. So we go apply. We see it and we think that looks better than it did. Following our standard pattern, again, we've made a change, so we should grade it. This one, we know the shape is right, but we've made quite a big change to it, so maybe we should call that poor. And then we apply it. So that's done it, and then the last thing we need to do is remember to save this back to the server so other people see this correction. And again, if you don't want to see the original one, you can just click that off and that's the final. That's now what our record is saying. But this view can quite often, it's quite useful to see the before and the after. So you can see this in it. If anybody's got any questions as we're going through this, feel free to sing out. Okay, the next correction is some sort of trend type stuff. So this one in the first instance, I think is this one actually a correction? So the first one is sort of showing some analysis, but then we start looking at some corrections to fit it. So what we're talking about is we've got a record here that's quite noisy, but we can see probably the predominant record is towards the bottom, but it's obviously been quite noisy. First thing is they're just showing us an example of this. To be fair, this particular exercise is a bit of new functionality they're building into the tool, which is more the sort of analyzing and having a look at it. So what this is going to do is it's going to look at that and just give you some. We're going to look at that period of time, and it's going to give us sort of the we'll do a linear regression and kind of give us the R² score and show us what that line would look like if we do linear regression on it. This is kind of a growing, it's not actually a correction itself, but a growing sort of analytical bit that they're putting into the tool to look at the data. So that's what we're going to do first with it anyway. So what we need to do again is first part of this is we need to find the period of time. So we're told in the instructions it's January the 9th, 2014, which means it's probably in this period here. So let's go across to there. January the 9th starts about there, so let's zoom in on that. And let me just see how long a period are we talking about? June 23rd. Sorry, so I've moved into the markup, so I didn't want to mark up. I was still zooming. So click on that button, and we want to zoom in to about here. So this is let's just clear the selection for now. This is the period that they're talking about that's quite noisy. I mean, if you zoom in on it even more, you can see that it's quite noisy, but there's a predominant record down the bottom. Having zoomed in like that, if I want to go back to the previous view, I can click on this and it'll zoom me back out, or it's supposed to. Zoom me back out. If that doesn't work, just zoom back out a bit using this. You can drag it around. We want to be a little bit to there. We probably want a bit more. There we are. So to do this analysis, we've now found the period that we're interested in. We now need to mark the period that we're interested in. And generally, in this case, it's probably between the field visits. So what we do is we're going to select a period. We really want the period to be between the field visits. So what we do is before we mark it up, we just change this option from being from the data set to field visits. What that means is when I go to mark it and I just drag, I can be reasonably inaccurate. Like if I do that, it will automatically, should do, be good enough to drag it to the field visits. It's not quite doing that, is it? We've marked up the region. And then for this one, we're just going to do an analysis one, which is if we click on this tab here, it's the analyze section. So sorry, I've got to mark it up. I need to move to the analysis tool and then mark it up. Here we are, now marked it up in the analysis. So again, if you missed that, I went to this analysis mode. Once I moved into that mode rather than the normal editing mode, I then had to mark up the region. So I might do that again just in case people missed it. Let's close that. So to do analysis on this region, I click the analysis button. Then I mark up and then I said I want it snapping to field visits, and I just roughly pick it and it snaps it to the 2 field visits, and that's my period. So then we want them to do the analysis on us. So we just go analyze. And so it does a linear regression on this and gives us the line of best fit. And so you can see the line of best fit that would go through this data. It gives us basic information about that line of best fit, and we can see more information about that line of best fit if we're useful to us. So where you want to do linear regression on a period, you can do that on this sort of thing. In terms of actually correcting this data, personally, I'm not sure that would help you much for this one. But it is possible, and I guess as much as anything, it's a reflection of the tool starting to introduce these analytical bits that are going to build into helping us make corrections. What we're going to do now is we're now up to step 6 on page 63. So this time what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to try and make a correction on this period of data. So let's clear out of all of this, but we're still interested in this period of data. Let's close the analysis. So we're still interested in this period of data. What we're going to do is we're going to try and do an outlier trim. So what an outlier trim does is it basically says if any point is too far away from what I describe, please delete it. That's essentially what it does. And we describe in configuring it, we describe what too far away means. So let's go through an example of that. So we have found the period roughly we're interested in. We're now going to make a correction. So we're going to go into the correction mode. We need to mark it. And so we're saying it's really a period between these field visits. And the particular, now sometimes this, I guess the point to make is sometimes these views are hard to see the detail because it's also showing you a point, all these little points. In your view of the time series, you can clean that up a bit. If you actually say, don't show me the data points as sort of little bullet points, just show me the lines, you unclick that. It becomes neater when you want to see this kind of detail at this scale. So yeah, just up there, you can turn these options on and off. So in this case, to do this correction, it's kind of more, it's quite useful not to see the points because then you can see some of the detail of the variance. what we're going to pick, so we've found the rough area, we've marked up the region. What we're going to do in this term is a correction which is called an outlier trim. What you get to do in the outlier trim is you get to describe, well, which bits should I take out? And so what we're going to do in this case is we're going to take out bits that deviate from the minimum, because we know when we looked at it, the minimum was probably the most the core data, and the rest was variance away from that. So our base message was in the minimum values, and we're basically saying if anything gets too far away from the minimum, then we want to delete it. What's the window? So we're going to do a sort of window of points. So we're saying every 30 minutes, any point that is more than 0.02, whoops, 0.002 away from it should be removed. So the window is, it's going to do a mean of the 30-minute window of points around the point we're talking about. And if the mean of the 30-minute window is more than 0.002 of the minimum of that window, then it deletes it. So if we describe that and we apply it, you'll see this is one of these cases where it's a bit hard to see now. What did it leave? Because I can still see my corrections. So you might want to turn off your corrections, the raw view, and just see the corrections. And you can see it's kind of left a trace that looks probably better than we had anyway. Certainly not perfect, but better than we had. What the suggestion is in this example is, okay, having taken out those points, we probably want to put some points back in. We're reasonably happy that we'll do some gap filling. So we're now, having done the outlier, we're now going to do another correction, which is a gap fill. So we're saying, let's put a value in every 15 minutes. We're saying we're happy to fill gaps of any size in this case, but we could limit it if we wanted to. But in this case, we're happy. And what we're saying is fill it with a value that is the linear interpolation between the 2 points that are either side of this bit that you're trying to fill the gap for. So you pick linear and apply. And what we should see then is we get much more of a normal looking 15-minute record. In this case, we want to put some special commentary in about what we did here. So we're going to add a note. So under the corrections, we can add a note. And if I just copy it from the... So here's a bit of an explanation of why did we do this correction. So we can see basically the orifice was being silted. And so basically, that's why we were seeing the values go up, as it got silted over and then it cleared, and then it silted over and it got cleared. And so that's why we were getting these noisy signals. So we go apply. Again, we should also grade it because we've made a correction. So let's pick a grade. This one, we probably can't give it too high a grade because we've made a lot of, I guess, adjustments and estimates, and fairly rough in terms of how those estimates were done. So we're just going to give it that grade. There we are. We've applied it. We can see now, if we look at our carpets, we can see there's the grade, but there's also the fact that we can see the note that we made. So we can see there's a markup to show there is a note for this period. And if you hover over it, you can see what the note is. If there are multiple notes that apply to the same period of time, when you hover over it, it'll show you all the notes. Again, when we're happy with that correction, we should save it to the server. Now what we're going to do is an adjustable trim correction. So this is suited to an example like the one we're going to do, which is when you look at this record, the actual correct values look like they're kind of in the middle and we've got noise either side. So we're going to do a trim that kind of takes out the noise at the top and the noise at the bottom. We're going to have a few goes at methods of doing this. So we'll just start working through. So first part of our pattern is find the period of data we're interested in. And the example tells us the first 2 weeks of the data, i.e. this bit down here. So if we zoom down here, we'll see we've got this noisy patch at the beginning. So this is the bit of data that we're going to correct. So let's just zoom in a bit more closely to that. There's the period of data. So we've got in there roughly, and we can turn, we've still got the points turned off. So if you want to see the data points, we turn that back on. So the data points on. So we're roughly in the right area. Now we need to mark up the period that we want to adjust. So in this case, we're just going to be sort of not too accurate. So we're just going to mark up a period like that. So we've got the period marked up. Now the correction we're going to make in this case is called an adjustable trim. So then what happens with the trim is we've got to mark basically a series of lines. So there's the above ones and then there's the below ones. So basically if we do the above ones, any point that is above where we mark will be removed. And when we put the below ones in down below, anything that's any points below what we draw will be also removed. So seeing how that works, start with the up one. So if we put some points in where we want to do this, so we might start there and then put another point there and then come down to here. So we just work our way through, and I mean, if you were doing this properly, you would probably spend a bit more time doing this accurately. And then I get to here and I kind of go, well, what am I doing? There's a point way up there. You can move these, having put them in. So if you click on the screen, it puts a new one in. But if you hover over one, you can drag it and move them. So we could move any of these. So that one we put in there, we could move it up to there if we want to. So at the moment, what we've marked up is any point that is above this red line with the dots in it will be removed when we apply this. And so you get to spend as much effort as you want in deciding which points to keep and below. And then we need to mark the ones below. So we go through a similar process. And again, this last point, we probably just drag it. So we've got that. So when you're happy with these points, you then just go apply. And you can see what it's done is it's left the points in that were below where I marked, and it removed the ones that were above it. And if we put in a note, so what they're saying is, oh, you've applied that. Now what we should do is, we should put a note in to sort of indicate what we did. So we'll put that in, we'll apply that. We should see again our note there, and if we apply on it, we can see it. And most of you are probably still in this view where we've got the raw showing, so you'd see the original record as well. So if we clear it, it looks like that. So that's done. An attempt at doing it, you kind of go, that's not too bad. Today we think that's not too bad, so we save it. Overnight, you talk to one of your friends and decide that that correction actually wasn't how you want to do it. So we've decided we actually want to delete that correction. If we come to the edit history, this is the correction that we did because we're seeing the corrections for the period we're looking at. If we delete it, it will get rid of that correction that we did and we can save that to the server. Because we've been talking to our mate overnight, he's got a suggestion for another way of making that correction, and that is what we're now doing in step 8. So we did the correction in 7, but then we decided we've got a better way of doing it, so we've deleted the old correction and we're going to do it again with a new one, and we're going to use a pencil tool. Now, yeah, I mean, all of you will need to look at these correction methods and decide whether they're appropriate. In general, what we're doing here is basically going to be a freehand correction of the data. It would be rare, I would suggest, that is a correction you would actually choose to actually do, but we'll show you how you can do it if you want to. Maybe it's the best you can do, so maybe it is the good option. So anyway, we're going to come back. So we're at the same period, got to follow our pattern. We've roughly got it right now. We need to mark it up. So let's mark up the period. So mark from there to there. And then we're going to do an override correction again. But if you don't select one of these, you can use the pencil to draw the line. So basically what you get to do is you use your cursor and your mouse and hold it down, and you can draw freehand the line that you think should remain. So you just draw it. So you just use your mouse to draw it. And then you're going, well, let's have a look and see how that looks. Apply it. Take off maybe a correction so you can see it. That is what would happen. And you can see there's probably a few points at the end here that we didn't correct, but maybe we would if we were doing it properly. But that's the method whereby you can just use that approach. And then again, we need to grade it if we're going to keep it. So we grade it. Say that we think that's a pretty poor one because we did it by freehand. So there's not a lot of evidence. And we save. Oops. Cancel. We need to apply that change and then save. We then talked to a mate overnight again, and as per step 9 of this tool, he or she says, actually, I've got another suggestion for how we should correct this. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete the correction we just made with the freehand, and we're going to try a moving average filter as a method of correcting for this. So step 9 on page 68. So what we do again is let's just clear the selection. We've decided that that correction we made yesterday we don't want, so let's delete it. So we delete the correction. There we are, back with it. So what we're now going to do is there's our data back and we can see it all. We're following step 9. We're going to do a moving average one. So same pattern. We need to mark up our data. So let's mark it. You want to be more accurate, you can do our zoom in to see the points that you've got marked. Maybe we want to pull this one out to where the field visit roughly was. Get the period that you're happy with. And then we're going to do, this is a variation again of an override correction. And this time we're going to use a moving average filter. So the start point for this is we say, what's the window size? So we're saying, 51, and we do 20 iterations. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure how this algorithmically does it, but obviously it's a combination of moving average of points to try and decide what to leave. And the black line that we now see on the screen is what it thinks it should be if you base it on a moving average type algorithm. When we look at that, we would probably be unlikely to think that this was a correct top end. So what you can do is you can use the adjust tool to move points. So what you can do is you can mark various points on this curve that it's produced, and you can move them up a bit. So we could move this one up, put another point there, move it down. So you can kind of, in this one, you're using the moving average to sort of set up the rough thing. And then if you choose to, you can adjust or override what the moving average would have done to make it fit better. So this is all about really a correction and a technique that, you know, in the end, you're trying to fit the replacement shape to best suit where you're at, you know, and if you were doing this, you probably would be looking to drop this down a bit, maybe point in there, but you're almost back to that adjustable trim if you go to this too far. But that's how you would do it. If you decided you were happy with that, you would apply it. Again, potentially turn off the raw so you can see it. And if you were happy with that, you would apply it, and then you go up, and we need to grade it. And it's not a great method, so it's probably pretty poor. We apply that, and we'd also potentially put in a note to explain what we've been up to. And you apply that. And again, we see the notes there, and then we go save. Now, what you can see is, there's an interesting example. I didn't delete the note from the previous correction. And so when I hover over this now, you can see how it's showing two notes. So one was from the previous correction I didn't delete, and I've added another one. So for this period of time, there is now effectively two notes in the way I've set it up. And so when you hover over them, you see both. So that's a good example of how you can have more than one note applying at the same time if you need to. I mean, in this case, it's because I forgot to delete the other one, but you could. So if we're happy with all of that, we go save. The next correction is one, again, that's possibly more commonly used. Certainly at NIWA, we do use this one quite a bit. This one it's a copy and paste, so it is reliant on you having some other source of data that you think is a reasonable replacement. So in our case, many of our sites at NIWA, we operate a primary recorder and a backup. So potentially, you know, if the primary one has some bad data in it, we can copy and paste from the backup into it. So that's the example that we're going to work through with the step 10 in terms of what it's mimicking in the real world. So the example is we're about to load a backup set of data, and then we're going to copy and paste it in over that period. The first correction we did where we deleted the data, we're going to actually copy and paste the secondary one in over the top of it. So that's what this example is going to be. So the first step they want us to do in this example is we actually need to load some data. So let's just close this window. So we need to use our append tool that we started looking at yesterday. And so we open the append tool, and is it going to open for me? Is all of these windows open? Okay, so it did open. So in this, and what we need to do is we need to load the file that we find. We are in lesson 5, and we're going to open when we look at our lesson 5 directory, the stage 1 secondary text file. And so we open that. They've also provided the config file for it. If we look at that, we want the metric one. So let's pick that, which means we don't have to describe how to load this. The rules are already there. We can then pick the load file button. And the thing we're going to do with this one, which is a bit different once it loads, is we are actually going to use, before we've always appended the data to a data set that existed. In this example, we're actually going to get it to create a new data set with this bit that we're loading. So we select that, and then we go append. And you can see what it's coming back to us is it's creating a data set that is called stage.secondary and loaded the data into it. So if we come back to this view and update it, what we should see is there's an extra data set in here now with some data in it, and there it is there. So this is, we've now basically created or loaded some extra data that we're going to use for the copy and paste. What we haven't done before, well, not really, is when we load data, we did say, oh, if you click a couple of items and put them, you know, two different data sets, and there's nothing in the discharge version, that's not going to work. Let's pick something that's got some data. These, and we choose to use the data review tool, it will load both of them so you can see them. And that's fine. And that's quite useful at times. But the trick you've got to remember is when it comes to corrections, only one data set can be corrected. So which one, if I select two, which is the one the correction is going to be applied to? Now, this is all about the order in which you select the data sets to show. Effectively, the first one that you click on is the one that will be corrected. Any others are sort of the assistants to it. So for us to make this correction, we actually want to correct the stage.working, because this is the one we've been doing, and we want to use the stage.secondary to help us. So we need to click this one first and that one second. If you're not sure what order you click them in, you can also tell from over here, because this view over here shows you what is clicked, and the one with the more of the bullseye looking one is the one that you clicked first, is the one that is the primary one and the one that will be edited. So if you're not sure, you can come and check, and you can see from this, it's telling me the stage.working is the one that will be edited if we make an edit. The other ones are the assisting time series. So that's what we'll do. I just noted in the thing what they want us to do, not that I think it matters too much, is they want us to associate the secondary with, say it's a part of the sublocation. So just to remember how to do that, if we grab the data set and we want to say change sort of some of its metadata, we grab the data set's hamburger button, we go to its details. When we look here at the moment, by default, it's just part of this location. We want to associate with the sublocation. So for the sublocation field, we just put that in, and they want us to save it. It's really just metadata. It's not going to make too much difference, but it can be helpful in describing the system, because it's suggesting that perhaps this sensor is in a slightly different position from the other ones. Okay, so now we're going to make this correction. So again, let's pick the stage.working, because that's the one we want to edit. We then click the secondary. We can check we've got that in the right order by looking here. We then open our data review tool to make this correction. What we need to do is we want to zoom into the area where we did the delete region, which if we remember, the delete region that we did was done in late August 2013. So if we zoom in on that area, we can find this period where there's a flat 9. Now, if I want to see what we're talking about, this is the secondary data set that we've just added. So let's just turn that off. If we remember, our original record, whoops, that just makes it scale, looked like this with this flat line, but we deleted it. So now our stage.working has this gap in it. But from our secondary record, we can see that it has this record, and we know that it's a pretty good fit for this site. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste the period of this gap from the secondary to the primary. So we're going to copy from this red one, and we're going to make it part of the blue one. So how do we do that? We do the same thing that we did before. If we turn that back on and maybe turn that off for now, because we need to mark the region that we want to correct. Now, the bit that we want to correct is the bit that we deleted. So let's mark that up and check it that we've got it right. So yeah, we got that point there, and that looks good. So we've marked up the right region. We might want to turn this back on now just so we know what's going on. And I'm just checking. So, and now we need to describe the correction. So the correction is an override again, and this time it's a copy and paste. We get to say which data set are we copying and pasting from, and it is the secondary. It is possible to move the data that you're copying in time. So this might be, if the site you're copying from, we'll say, was upstream, half an hour upstream, but you know the shape of that was, you know, it was the same, but just got there half an hour earlier, then potentially, you know, you could use the record, but you just need to move it by 30 minutes or something, because that's the time it takes to get from the upstream site down to the one we're talking about now. So it is possible as part of the correction. In our example that we're doing here, we're assuming that essentially the secondary sensor was at exactly the same location. So we don't need to move it in time. We just need to copy the points. So we can leave that at 0 and we go add line. And then if we want to see what we've effectively done, if we turn the secondary off and we turn our raw off, we can see the view that we're going to be left with. And that's pretty good. So we can apply that, and we should set a grade. And they're saying pick 30. Because this one, there's a bit of evidence, because it's actually a sensor at the site that we've been maintaining. We have a bit more confidence, and this is a replacement, that it's a pretty good reflection of what the primary should have recorded. So we go apply. So that is an example where we've basically been able to take a flat line and replace it with a curve that actually is a pretty good fit. So if you've got secondary sensors or potentially ones up and downstream, you know, that can be a good fit. And then you may just need potentially, you know, you might need to scale it up and down a bit, but it can be a useful fit. The next fix is an example where, I guess, particularly if you've got pressure transducers in the field, so they might drift over time. So you left them in there for a few months and slowly they've drifted, and you've gone 3 months later, you've gone and done a field visit, you've seen the real value. Now you need to look at the data from that previous 3 months and you need to adjust it because of that drift. So in step 11, we're going to do a correction for a drift. So what we're seeing is, if we look at this data before we do it, we've got a field visit here. So we know the data was pretty much the right here, but then we're starting to see evidence that when we did this field visit, we can see when we were there, the stage was here, even though the sensor was saying the stage was up here. And again, we can see that. So we know, because it's a PT, we know that the shape is right, but it's been drifting. So what we have to do is we want to keep the shape, but we want to drag these values down to match up better with the field visit readings. So the evidence is, this is what we know to be true. We know the general shape is true, but needs to fit through these points. So that's the correction that we're going to try and do. So first thing is we have to find the rough period, and they said this period is between October the 3rd and November the 7th, 2017. So it's kind of in this period here. And there we go. I actually did a pretty good job of finding that straight away. So here we can see the staff gauge value, which matches pretty well. And then we're starting to see that things are drifting off. And then we went and did a visit here where they actually fixed the sensor up in terms of probably recalibrated it. And so we're now, the drift is right. So it's right from here. So we need to move these points. So first thing is to mark the period. Now what we're going to do to assist us is, because this one's based on field visits, we're going to do the marking based on field visits. And we want to do it between about here and here. So I forgot to save the other one, so let's cancel. Let's save the other edits. We haven't applied them. So cancel. Let's apply the previous change. Save them. Right, now we're ready to do this correction. So I want to mark my period up. So I've snapped to those. Then I found, even though the instructions don't say it, I think to get this to work, we have to then take it back to target. Is this the one we have to do that? Well, maybe I'll just leave it there and just see if it works. So we need to then put in markers. No, so that's it, is this one. So let's do that again. So clear, let's mark our region. So we're going to do it snap to field visits and then mark the region. And then we need to mark it as a drift correction first. So maybe it is okay. Then we need to, so what we're going to need to do is, because we're going to need to drag down some points, we have to add the points we want to drag down onto the plot. So we want to put some markers, some drag points. If you look at what we're looking to achieve, is we need to get these drag points marked on, and we really want, in the first instance, we want to get them at roughly the same time as the field visits, and then we will drag them to the right to put them in the visit. So really, when we're putting them on, it's about getting them in the right place and time. So we're roughly sort of saying we want it about there in time. This is this one. Hang on. Let's do this again. I think this is the one where I had to. If I use the field visit regions to select the period, then I found that if I set it to target there and then say I want to do a drift, I get these points to start with. So you can use, so I'll do that again to show you, because it's not quite what the manual says. Because I want to snap it to the start and stop to be based on these field visits, I'm going to select my region based on using the set it to field visits, so it snaps nicely to that. But then, because I've got to make some adjustments, I change this to say now, from now on, snap to data sets, and then I pick the drift correction. That puts in my initial 2 points that I will drag later, but I can then add, I'm in a mode where I can add extra points. So what I do is, if I click basically in the same time as the field visits, it doesn't matter where at the stage where I click, but if I click, it'll add a time. And what it's doing is it's putting the point on where the plot is, but it's at the time that I'm talking about. It's important. So I'm getting a point for dragging at each of the times of my field visit. Then what I want to do is I want to explain the drag. And I just realized that Okay, so what I've actually done is I haven't got the point right. I needed my last point that I want to edit to be this point up here. So I need to clear this and do this again. So let's just do that again. So starting again, we're going to start by snapping to field visits to get it roughly right. Then we're going to go to target visits. Now what I need to do is I need to fix this end bit up, because at the moment it's picking the point down there as the last point, and I actually want the last point to be up here. So we use this zooming in bit to zoom in. So I'm happy that's my start point. I'm not happy that's my end point. I want my end point to be there. No, I don't, sorry. I want my end point to be there. Now I've got the right period. I now mark up that I want to do a drift correction. That gives me my start and end points. I need to go through that process of adding the points in again. And then what we do is we work out, okay, so really what we know at this time is it should be down here where the field visit is. So I'm going to drag it down on top of the field visit. This one here, I know that that point really should be there at that time. This point here should be where my field visit is at that time. And this one should be where my field visit is. And this last point that's way too high should be basically where my last field visit is. So what that's done is given an indication of how much it needs to move everything. When we apply it, what you'll see is it's going to keep all this kind of shape and variance, but it's going to fit it. It's going to move the various bits to fit through here. So we go apply, and it redraws it like that. So it's kind of keeping the shape, but making it sure it's going through the points that you had evidence for. Again, we're happy with that as a correction, best we can do. We would still grade that quite lowly because obviously there's a fair amount of uncertainty in that. Even though we've got the gauge, the field visit information to help us with it, you would still argue there's a fair amount of uncertainty in that. So we'd probably grade that as poor, and then we can save it. Again, seeing the grade turning up there, and we hit save. So that is a lot of the core corrections that we need to do in the tool. If we look at 12, I guess it's just exploring a little bit of what we can see with that now. Just a couple of, so these are not corrections, just sort of reviewing the corrections we've done. So if we look at that, if we want to see the view of changes, as I explained, when you're in this data review tool and you look at the edit history, it shows you the corrections for the period of time you're looking at. So if we zoom out and look at a larger period of time, so i.e. now we're pretty much looking at all of it, we see this list is much larger now, and is all the corrections that we've been making this afternoon. You can also drag these windows out further because there is actually often many more columns that are available that you can see if you drag it out. You can actually also make it a separate window if you want to. So you can drag these. So if you've got two screens, so I'll just drag this off the screen, you can take advantage of some of these things to look at things separately. So you can look at them, you can sort on them, you can move the columns around if you want to get a view of the list of the corrections that you've made. So it can be quite helpful to see all of that. Particularly, and again, you're getting to see the comments or notes from this period that help you understand the corrections that you've made. So if you're anything like NIWA, when you get this going, you will have probably a process of people that are making the changes. and then you may have a separate person that kind of review and approves them. So this person, if you have someone that needs to review the changes of other have made to approve them, then working through this list of what changes have been made and why is likely to be part of their process. So they're likely to want to see a view like this, potentially have them sorted on the time that they apply to, and then they can look through them and make sure they're happy that your processes in terms of what corrections are allowed, what evidence you need to make those corrections, have they graded them if they've made corrections, all that sort of thing can be reviewed. So this view here helps you do that. And again, ultimately, at this stage, if you've got the right, you could delete the corrections if the reviewer decides they're not appropriate. You could delete them and request other changes or whatever else you want. So that's a view that's worth seeing. Another thing that's worth seeing, if you're looking at the time series, one of the things you might want to know is, and maybe we'll just get rid of this selection so that we don't confuse ourselves. If we're looking at all the data, something that's sometimes quite useful is if you just want to see what gaps are in the data, because that can be a sign of where you might want to be correcting, you can click on this button and it will show you only the gaps. So while this at the moment is showing you all the timestamps in this period of data that you're looking at, if you just want to see where the gaps are, because sometimes they can be hard to see because they're so small, you can click on there, and then if you click on them, it'll show you where the gaps are. And then if you want to zoom in, you can go in and zoom in on those and sort of go, why was that? And what we can see here is we probably didn't really quite correct enough when we didn't put a replacement point in here, and it was big enough for the system to consider that a gap. So you might want to go through and do another edit if you really don't want a gap in there. That is all of the examples in section 5. The next step for us is the rating curves, but that's quite a new, quite a big section on its own and quite a thought process. I probably am not that keen to start that with half an hour to go. We're probably better off doing that fresh tomorrow when everybody's back into it. So we do technically have half an hour. Does anybody have any questions or would like me to repeat an example or anything like that in the intervening time? In the remaining time? What could we do? I'm just looking at something I could potentially show you an example of that we haven't done. Because what we do when we look at this, what's remaining, we do come back to a couple of corrections that in section 7, we do come back to what are called open-ended corrections. And I'm just wondering whether we could perhaps take a look at a couple of those today, if we want to. Just trying to check whether these open-ended corrections, whether we need to have done the rating to be able to do these, or whether we could do them today. So I'm just having a quick flick. So what with lesson 7, which is actually after the ratings one, is when we do a couple of other sort of corrections of data. And I'm just having a look to see, do we need the rating? We probably could start with those. So would you like to carry on with that, or do we want to finish here and start fresh tomorrow? Who would like to comment on that? Do we want to keep going for another half hour? Shall we keep going for another?
I think maybe we can continue tomorrow. The lesson 6 pa yan? 7.
Yeah, so the intention for tomorrow was 6 and 7, yes. Certainly 6 I think we want to do when we're fresh. We probably could have a look at 7 if we wanted to now, but either way, or we can wait for tomorrow for both of those. So does it sounding like we want to finish here for today, and unless someone's got some questions they want to ask, and start fresh tomorrow?
Okay, so I think we can give a chance to those who would want to ask questions first, since we still have some time. So to all participants who do have questions or concerns, you may type them into chat in the chat box.
Regarding po dun sa, yun nga po, ma'am, paano po ba yun, ma'am? Pwede po ba
Okay, if not, maybe we could continue on lesson 7, right?
Yep, we can start with that.
Yeah, so for lesson 7, we'll be discussing lesson 7 for tomorrow already.
Yep, so we could start that now if we want to.
Oh, okay. So
Well, do you want to or not? I mean, we could, if there's no questions now, we can either stop or we could start lesson 7.
Okay.
Your choice what we want to do. Stop or continue.
Maybe we could ask the participants to raise their hands if they still want to continue on this lesson 7, because we're scheduled to end the webinar on 12 p.m. and we only have around 28 minutes. Would that be enough to cover the whole lesson?
Not the full lesson, but we could probably do a couple of the steps, and then we would come back to them tomorrow.
If ever, what would you want? Would you want us to continue with this one so we can maximize our time?
If people are fresh enough, we could start with a couple of these if people are happy to. Yep, we could do maybe the first couple of steps. I think the first couple of steps, by the look of them, are adding telemetry data in as the first step. So it's really file appending some more data and different ways of doing that. So we could do that. So we could probably try and do step 1 and 2, which is basically just adding some more data into the system. So we try that.
Okay, so that sounds good to our participants.
Okay. So
I think we can continue with a few more slides, and then we'll just discuss the rest for tomorrow. Will that be okay with you? Okay.
So the normal sequence of things from here is what we will do tomorrow is we've done some corrections. The next step is to develop a rating curve. So the rating curve is how we will be able to create flow. If we look at all our data sets at the moment, you'll see all the ones that are discharge or flow related. We don't have any data in them. And that's because we need to define a rating curve to be able to create those. So we're going to do that tomorrow because that's quite a topic on its own. But what we normal sequence after that, what we would be doing is we would start looking at some other corrections that might be based on the telemetry data, so open-ended type corrections and things. So the first step in that is we have to pretend to add some telemetry data to the system, which we would then correct. So what we might do in the last 20 minutes is get a little bit ahead and show you the demonstration for adding this telemetry data that we will use later. It is essentially very similar to the patterns we did yesterday with loading data, but just with some different data sets. So it's going to be, should be somewhat familiar to you all from what we did yesterday. So we should be able to go through it reasonably quickly. So if we look at it, so what we're doing is we're going to do the first couple of steps in step 7, which if I keep scrolling down, so in step 7, so the first thing we're going to do is, if we think of what we did, we've been working with the stage.working, which is in our example is effectively a logger download of data. In many situations, there'll be a feed from the system that is telemetered, and it will be coming into the data really quickly, and then every so often they'll go out into the field and get the logger data. So what we are now pretending to do is we're going to say, oh, we've now got some telemetry data, and we're going to add that into the system to become part of what we do and part of the derivations of things. So what we're doing in step 1 is we're going to add this telemetry data into the data sets. So for this, what we need to do hang on. Just quickly flicking through. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up stage.working, which is a calculated data set, to start reading its data from the stage.telemetry. Now, there is no data there at the moment, so we're just setting up the rule in the first instance. So to do this, we get into the edit mode for our stage.working. So if we open the stage.working, what we see is it has what's called, as all of our derived data sets do, it has a processing period, which at the moment says it's a pass-through. And from the beginning of time, it is simply passing through the stage.logger through to this data set. What we're going to do now is we're saying we're going to change that rule. We want it to do something different. So we're going to add a new rule. Now, a new rule is done by adding a new processing period. So to do that for the stage.working, we're going to click add. So just go back to this again. Stage.working, we go to our hamburger to look at the details. We want to change the rule on this one, so we're going to add a processing period. So the first step you do when you set up a new processing period, which is this new rule for this data set, is when does this start applying from? So in this example, they want us to apply it from 2014, 29th of January. And from 1315. And it's going to be another pass-through rule, but this time, instead from that period of time, instead of passing through stage.logger, which is what the current rule said for the other time, we want it to get it from the telemetry one. So we say stage.telemetry, and it's a copy from source, and then we save that. So now just going over what this has is there's two rules for this data set. So I'm going to save that and I'm going to go through. So what clear things to recap. What we're talking about here is the stage.working, which is a derived data set. So that means it's got rules that say how does it get its data. Two things to note is we have two other data sets in the system. Stage.logger, which is the one we've already loaded and we're pretending is the one that we go and get that data when we do field visits. Stage.telemetry is one we're pretending is one that's hooked to our telemetry system, so it's probably got data appearing in near real time. What we have configured in the rule for stage.working is saying there's two rules for how I get my data. And let's have a look at those rules. What it's saying is, when we look at this, what we're now saying is there's two rules. The first rule, which applies from the beginning of time until this date, is the rule says get your data from stage.logger. So any data that gets into stage.logger for that period of time goes in straight into this stage.working data set. From the 29th of January 2014 onwards, this data set will get its data from the stage.telemetry record. So that's the rule. So we've got two different rules for this. Basically, for some of its life, stage.working gets its data from the stage.logger data set, and some of its life, it's going to get it from the stage.telemetry. At the moment, you can see that the stage.logger has data until the 29th of the 1st, 2014, and you can see our stage.working is saying it's also got data until the 29th of the 1st. So in actual fact, at the moment, the only data in this is the data from stage.logger. That's because we haven't loaded anything into the telemetry file. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add some data to the stage.telemetry data set. And that is, if you're following along, step 2 in this lesson 7, so page 85. So this should be reasonably familiar to us. We open the append logger tool. So we can do that, and I think I've actually got two versions of it open, so I'll close that one. What we're going to load is we need to be in lesson 7 now. Is we are going to load stage.2 15-minute. So let's open that. We have the config file for it because we're metric. So we can load that as well. Then we load the file. It's loading, loading, loading as we expect it. So there's quite a bit of data in this file by the look of it. It's taking a while. There we go. So we can see the data starts from the 29th of the 4th, 29th of the 1st in 2014, which is kind of what we expected based on the rules we've set up. So what we're saying is please append this data, and now we're going to put this into the stage.telemetry. So we say that one, and we're going to go append. So it's appended it, which is good. The other thing we're going to do is, because we want to add another file, is we're going to set up the parser so that we can do the drag and drop of another file without needing to reconfigure it through this again. So we're going to go add to parser. And what we need to do is we know that the format, according to this, is the format of files that we want to automatically load are *15-minute.txt. So what as we did yesterday, what this is saying is this set of rules that we've just defined, you can reapply them for any file that tries to get loaded that matches *15minute.txt. So if we do that and we go, okay, I'm just checking I've done that right. 15minute.txt, that looks right. So what we've done is we've loaded one file already, and we've set up the parser that we could load others. So if we close that, what we should now see is that if we refresh, particularly with watching the stage.telemetry and the stage.working, so there's nothing at the moment in the stage.telemetry, and the stage.working finishes at the end of January in 2014. We've just loaded some data. So if we refresh, we will see that the system has loaded some data into the telemetry from the end of January through to 2015. So that's now sitting there. But what we also see is that data has been loaded into our stage.working. So because of that rule, it's automatically passed through. How long have we got? So the next step, and we'll just see how far we can get, is what they're trying to do is an open-ended correction. So really what an open-ended correction is, and why we're doing it separate in terms of lessons, is an open-ended correction is one that all the other corrections that we've set up so far have had a start date and an end date, which means, and then we apply it to a particular period of time. An open-ended correction is one that's oriented at telemetry feeds, because basically we set up the rule and we put no end date on it, which means if data is added to the data set, then this correction that is defined will be applied when that data is added. So open-ended corrections are ones that in essence will continue to be applied to data as it is added into the system. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a trim as an example that is an open-ended correction, and then we will add some more data and we will see that it is applied. Now we may not get all the way through that today, so we may have to come back to it tomorrow, but we'll set up the correction anyway. So we should be able to do step 3, I think. So what we're going to do is set up this open-ended correction. So it's step 3 on page 86, if anybody is following this through in the manual. So what it says we should do is zoom into the sections. So if we open, it says open stage.working in the data review tool. So we're going to open that. And we should be able to see that there is data in there. Yep. Which I'm just not quite so well prepared for this one today. I wasn't there expecting to do this. So we're just saying open it, and now part of the stage.working as the pass through. So we see that. So we can see the data's gone through. Click the edit tool on the start and end data points. Then what are we going to do? All right. We're going to put the correction in. So what they're basically saying is we're going to add a correction to the stage.working, but this, because we want it to apply to the whole record, we're going to do this in a simple way. We're going to click on the begin of time, end of time options over here rather than need to set or drag and drop. So we've basically said the whole record now for stage.working, we want to apply this correction to. Then what we're doing is we're going to do a outlier trim. So we set up the correction like we followed for our other corrections, outlier trim. And then it says we're going to set the deviation from max in this case. And they're saying 200 minutes and 2.133 meters. And set the processing priority to pre. So this is where these processing priorities become important. Because there's a correction stack in the system, and you can have multiple corrections, open-ended corrections applying, the impact of what final data you get can depend on the order in which the corrections are applied. So if you need to guarantee, because you could imagine if you lifted everything by an offset was one correction, and then the other one was to take out values that were above a value, the result of those two depend on whether you do the offset first and then remove the high values, or you remove the high values and then you move it. So the order of which open-ended corrections are applied can affect the result. The way you can control that is you can set the priority for your corrections. And what it basically means is any corrections that are marked as pre will be done before the ones that are done as normal, which will be done from the ones as post. So if you want to guarantee the order of some of your corrections, you use those to set them. So if you know you need this one to go first, you'll mark it as a pre, and if you've got one you know needs to go afterwards, you might set it as normal or post. So it's not often that you would need to do this, but that is the possibility within the system, that if you have lots of open-ended corrections and you need to make sure they apply in the right order, you use that processing priority to set it. And then the one that is marked as pre will work first, the one that is marked as normal will come second, and then the one that is post goes third. So if we apply this, we should end up the data that looks like that. So we've done, basically we can see we took a couple of those outliers out. So at this stage, that correction is not open-ended because again, we had a begin and an end date. So in actual fact, in this thing, we've just done a correction. If we look, so if I'm just looking at the value. So what we did is we did the correction. We could then, in step 4, we would apply an open-ended gap fill. But I think we will leave that one for when we come back to it. So what we've effectively done in this remaining time is we have added some more data and we've seen how it can go through to the stage.working. So we've now got stage.working getting data from different places and different times in its life. And then we've applied an overall correction to the stage.working, which was to remove outliers. And that's probably a good point to stop for today. And then what we'll do tomorrow is we'll come back fresh and we'll do ratings. And then we will, once we've done the ratings, we will come back to this and look at actually setting up the open-ended corrections on this data and how they work. So from my perspective, I think we would halt from there. I guess there's 5 minutes to see if there's any questions. If there's not any questions, a chance for someone to put some closing remarks in for the day and set up for tomorrow.
Participants, do you have any questions, Paul? Sir Michael Dixon, do you have any questions or something to say po to our resource speaker? So I think Engineer Varg, they do not have any questions anymore. So tomorrow we'll just continue with the lesson 7, right?
We will probably go back and start lesson 6 and then finish lesson 7. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go back to lesson 6 tomorrow and then continue this topic.
Yeah. We'll finish this one off.